Again, welcome.
Yeah.
I think we can go ahead and get started, and we'll admit a few more people as they arrive. But I'm very grateful for everyone who's joining us tonight. My name is Tom King. I am a soon-to-be retiring professor at Brandeis University, which is located in Waltham, Massachusetts. I'm also a volunteer at the Somerville Community Growing Center in Somerville, Massachusetts, in the United States, which is sponsoring this event tonight. I am joining you tonight from the Brandeis campus, which sits on land that is sacred to the Pawtucket and Massachusetts nations, including 4 tribes existing today: the Matakeesit, Natick, Ponkapog, and Namasket. Tonight, the Growing Center is delighted to host Professor Janaina Campos Lobo's talk, The Challenges of the Anthropocene, Climate Change, and Ancestral Black Communities. Janaina is joining us tonight from Brazil, so I particularly appreciate that. I've been eager to learn from Professor Lobo's research because, as many of you know, Brazil will be hosting COP30, the 30th conference of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, this November. And Brazil announced at the end of May, in what is really an important change from preceding COPs, that traditional communities, family farmers, and Quilombola communities, Afro-Brazilian communities, will have direct access to the proceedings, centering them at the negotiating table. Anel Franco, the Minister for Racial Equality and leader of the International Commission of Traditional Communities, Afro-Descendants, and Family Farmers, has said, quote, that we cannot make progress on any issue related to racial inequality in this country, that is Brazil, without listening to those who suffer the most. Therefore, it is crucial to include Quilombola communities and Afro-descendant people who play a key role in preserving our planet in the Commission and in COP30, unquote. Before we begin tonight, I have just a little business to do. As you'll notice that I've turned on recording. We are recording tonight's event, and I'll share the recording with those who have registered, and we also may be hosting it on the Somerville Community Growing Center's YouTube channel as well. I'll keep you posted about that. Professor Lobo will be speaking tonight in English, but I am putting a copy of Professor Lobo's talk in the chat in Portuguese for those who'd like to read the talk in Portuguese. Those of you who asked for it in advance should have already received it in your email. After our presentation tonight, there'll be time for questions and answers and conversation. You're welcome to ask questions in either English or Portuguese. You can do so orally or post a question, write a question in the Q&A app, which you should find at the lower right of your screen. If you don't see it, click on the More button and you should be able to find the Q&A function there. Tonight's talk is sponsored by the Urban Pastorals Project at the Growing Center. I'll share some information about that in a bit. That project is supported by a public humanities community engagement grant from the Mandel Center for the Humanities at Brandeis University, where I am now, in partnership with the Somerville Community Growing Center and the Racial Justice Collaborative. Now I'd like to introduce Lisa Bucalacchio. Lisa is one of the founders of the Growing Center and currently the board vice president. And I will ask Lisa to say a few words about the center. At the center, Lisa works to foster an environment where all ages and abilities can discover how to apply their passions and talents towards building a model of sustainability, citizen engagement, and cultural exploration. And Lisa, cultural exploration, rather. And Lisa, I'm very grateful for your support of this event tonight and all of the urban pastoral events. And I'll turn it over to you.
I'll be very brief. Thank you, Tom, and everyone for coming tonight. We're always looking to find ways to build community, to connect people across ecological, nature, cultural, justice issues, and we tend to think of that as the local community. And we were very pleased tonight to expand that to South America. But it's very fitting with some of our recent events and celebrations with Festa Junina, with the racial justice event last week, with the climate convening earlier in the spring. So this is really a delightful and interesting way to think about how all these pieces and parts come together. We are a very small but vital piece of green space in an urban city, and it is a place where people can come and start to develop that relationship with both a place and the people who come there. It's those connections that help us think about, like, what are the questions? How come I met someone that I might not have met somewhere else? What are the ways that we can work together to think about this big, beautiful space that we share, and how we might care for it, and who is caring for it, and who is allowed to make those decisions and speak up about their role and responsibilities and rights, because they all come together. So the Growing Center is many things to many people, and we're glad to have this opportunity to think more academically about some of the topics that we might be discussing with young people in a different manner, but it is all connected. So thank you for being here this evening, and I think I'll pass it back to Tom.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Next, I'd like to invite Yumi Izuyama to introduce tonight's speaker. Yumi is a Somerville resident, originally from Brazil, and a volunteer, along with me, at the Somerville Community Growing Center. Yumi runs STEAM programs for children that combine storytelling with environmental education. And let me welcome you, Yumi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Janaina, for accepting our invitation to talk this evening. Janaina Campos Lobo is a professor at the Institute of Humanities at the University of International Integration of Afro-Brazilian Lusophony. I met Janaina while she was living in Cambridge as a visiting scholar at the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies last year. It was at a party hosted by a common friend. We quickly became friends when we found out we were both from Brazil, and when I discovered that Janaina was from Maranhão, a state in the northeast of Brazil that I'm very interested in because of its unique Afro-Indigenous culture. Janaina's research focuses on how Afro-descendant communities in Latin America, especially in Ecuador and Brazil, perceive, experience, and respond to climate change through ancestral knowledge, local practices, and multi-species relationships. I had the privilege of hearing her talk at Harvard and thought it would be wonderful if her work could be shared with the Somerville Community Growing Center community and beyond. Many of us are very concerned about the effects of climate change. I also believe we are, while living in an urban environment, searching for ways to both enhance and deepen our relationship with nature. Please join me in welcoming Janaina.
Oh, good evening. Thank you, Yumi. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Lisa. And good evening, everyone here. I am truly, truly happy to be here tonight. It's been, as I said, almost 3 weeks since I returned to Brazil, and the decision to come back is deeply connected to the political climate in the United States. Main categories have been used by researchers to describe this moment, but I choose to use the word authoritarianism. Only in authoritarian regimes are you forbidden from speaking freely. Only in authoritarian regimes does the law appear to be held hostage by political decisions. And today, the United States is under an autocratic government, where speaking about climate change, diversity, or even race relations is increasingly prohibited. That's exactly why I'm happy tonight. Speaking about climate change and Black communities across Latin America today is more than engaging with a possible future. It is taking a stand against an exclusionary political agenda. It is an act of resistance, but not only resistance. It is about having agency in the world. It is about raising our voice, even in situations of control and suppression. So I truly don't have the words to express my gratitude to Somerville Community Growth Center, to Ton, Yumi, and Lisa for all their efforts, and especially to Yumi for her friendship. It means a lot to me. Talk 3 weeks. Then I left the United States. So actually, I have to apologize in advance, and I really hope I will be able to communicate well with you all. I must admit I'm a little nervous, especially because this is the first time I'm speaking English again. So please bear with me. I will do my best. Well, let's start. I just have to check if the presentation is working, and I think it's working. And so Juan Garcia Salazar, an Afro-Esmeraldeño activist, collected this poem in 2012 in Playa de Oro. I believe it's a powerful way to begin an ethnographic journey, and I'm inviting everyone here tonight for this ethnographic journey. And I think it's a good idea to start with a poem, especially because this one speaks of a flood that happened in Playa de Oro in Ecuador. On Wednesday, the 19th, the water began to rise. Those near the shore could no longer sleep. They could not endure. As the sea struck and as the water passed by, scenes brought fear. And to understand what this is, I will have to write the sky. So I want to share some thoughts on what I call the challenge of the Anthropocene. And I will explain why I use this concept and how ethnography and more broadly anthropology can help us better understand these challenges. So I will organize my talk into 3 main points. First, I will discuss how anthropology contributes to the study of climate change and introduce key concepts that help us analyze this phenomenon. And yes, this might sound like I'm defending anthropology and the humanities, because in a way I am. And second, I will explore how climate change and environmental racism affects traditional and ancestral communities. Finally, I will present some insights from my nearly 20 years of ethnographic research focusing on Afro-descendant communities in Latin America, especially in Playa de Oro, northern Ecuador, which is Amazon region as well. So let's begin. Climate change is one of the biggest and most complex challenges of our time. It affects different regions and populations in different ways. Many believe it will be the most important environmental issue of the 21st century. The world's climate is changing in unpredictable ways, and industrial development has caused much more harm to life on Earth than people imagined a century ago. Anthropologists argue that to truly understand climate change, we must look beyond just human actions. We need to consider what some call more than human worlds. This means studying the relationships between humans, animals, rivers, forests, and other beings that shape our environment. Learning from local communities and their deep connections with nature is key to navigating this crisis. Important to mention that there's no single answer to how we arrived at this crisis, and there's no single we that experiences the same way. Climate change does not impact everyone equally. Some communities, especially those that contributed the least to the problem, are the most affected. This is why the perspective of historian Dipesh Chakrabarti is relevant. He reminds us that human values and perspectives are diverse. We cannot separate the environmental crisis from issues like justice, history, and culture. To truly understand climate change, we need to recognize not only the difference between human experience, but also deep connections between humans and non-human world. So in this research, I take an ethnographic approach to studying climate change. Instead of focusing on scientific climate data, I look at how Black communities in Latin America, especially in Ecuador and Brazil, as you said, understand and respond to environmental change. These communities have deep knowledge about their lands and have developed strategies to deal with environmental challenges for generations. It is no coincidence that despite so many challenges, especially those related to economic development, these communities are still here, alive, and teaching us a lot of lessons. Here at my university in Brazil, UNILAB, we support this proposition and we are working to expand this research to include Angola and Namibia, one of the regions suffering most from water scarcity, strengthening connections between Latin America and Africa and beyond, building bridges of knowledge across the global south. So I will talk briefly about the concept, but actually I wanna spend more time talking about ethnography, so this part will be really, really quick. The concept of the Anthropocene was introduced by Paul Crutzen and Eugene Storm in the 2000s. And highlights how humans have fundamentally changed the planet's geology and ecosystems, especially since the 18th century. Although the term has its limitations, it helps us think critically about the relationship between humans and nature. In anthropology, discussions about the Anthropocene connect to what we call the ontological term. This approach challenges us to rethink categories like nature and humanity. As the anthropology Elizabeth Povinelli suggests, which she's a professor at Columbia, this shift in thinking is both a response to and a symptom of the global ecological crisis. This perspective also brings us to cosmopolitics, a concept developed by the philosopher of science Isabelle Stengers. She argues that the Western scientific knowledge should not be the only way to understand the world. Other forms of knowledge, such as those of indigenous and Afro-descendant communities, should also be recognized and valued. Likewise, Isabelle Stengers insists that a project for the common good cannot begin with the expansion of Western values as a universal governance framework. Stengers, like other researchers, such as the French sociologist Bruno Latour, advocates for a prominent space for those who lack the power to represent themselves, for groups marginalized within the cycle of representative politics. This suggests that science can and should coexist with other worlds that have different metaphysical foundations. This is not just cultural relativism. It is about acknowledging ontological pluralism, the idea that there are multiple ways of understanding and existing in the world. We, as anthropologists, must ask, how can we build a more open world where different forms of knowledge work together to address global challenges like climate change? So, one of the key goals of my research my research is to recognize and respect different ways of knowing and existing in the world. In Afro-descendant communities, stones, rivers, forests, and spirits are not just objects. They are active participants in life. Recognizing these perspectives challenges Western ideas of knowledge and environmental management. By studying these communities, I aim to understand how they are protecting their lands from climate change and what strategies they have developed to resist environmental destruction. Their knowledge, it's not just historical, it is political. It is part of a fight for climate justice and territorial rights. Although studies on Afro-Latin American communities have grown in recent years, discussions about climate change have largely ignored the contributions of Black communities. And not only that, climate policies often rely on a single dominant form of knowledge. It is essential to highlight the environmental knowledge of Black communities and their deep, long-standing connection to the land. Understand that the world is constantly changing and that multiple beings share this space. These spaces help us see how these communities navigate environmental transformation. It also challenges dominant narratives that have historically excluded Black and Indigenous knowledge, as I said. After this really brief introduction to climate change and the new whole of anthropology, which is no longer centered solely on the human component, I want to pose a key question. Does climate change affect everyone equally? And how should we think about environmental racism and climate justice? Oh, I think I didn't change the screen, but no problem. So in January 2025, during a debate at Harvard Salata Institute, Ali Zaid, then the White House National Climate Advisor, spoke about the wildfires in Southern California. He argued that the climate crisis affects everyone indiscriminately, emphasizing that there are no climate havens. Even in the healthiest nations, as Zed said, people are starting to realize that climate disruption are global, demanding collective action. To some extent, this is true. Climate change impacts us all. But the real issue is how extreme climate events have irreversible effects on communities that are already marginalized and excluded from decision-making. Important to note that the concept of the Anthropocene, which is widely used in public policy discussions, often reinforce colonial structures of power and Eurocentric understandings of human impact on the planet. As a result, it tends to minimize the racialized dimensions of climate change. So I have to agree with the advisor from White House. Climate havens have never truly existed, especially when considering considering geography Catherine Yusuf's argument that race itself is a geological issue. This means that environmental racism isn't just about where people live and who is exposed to more pollution or climate disaster. Instead, Yusuf urged us to think about how certain material and political structures, such as land dispossessions, extractivism, and colonial policies, have long facilitated anti-Blackness and its ongoing forms of oppression. This brings us to a crucial question. How do political models worsen environmental racism? And more specifically, how do exclusionary policies contribute to the marginalization and even the erasure of those who seem to have no place in dominant discussions about the Anthropocene? The American anthropologist Nancy Shepherd Hughes, in her analysis of Hurricane Katrina, introduced the concept of the vulnerability of the poor. She argued that the disproportionate impact of natural disasters on low-income communities is not just about geography or climate change. It is the result of political neglect, racism, and deeply embedded structural poverty. Again, we must ask, does climate change affect everyone equally? So, over the past 30 years, I forgot, how can I speak this word, the intergovernmental panel on climate change. The word in Portuguese like appears, intergovernamental. So I try again. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, it's easier, has become a dominant institution in global environmental assessments. The IPCC was created to provide policymakers with scientific assessments on climate change, its risks, and potential solutions. Through its reports, it establishes what is considered legitimate knowledge on climate issues. However, like any powerful institution, the IPCC operates within a specific political and scientific framework. It prioritizes knowledge produced by biophysical scientists and aligns with the political interests of nation states. This means that it decides whose voices matter in climate debates and which perspectives get excluded. The IPCC's focus on nation states as the central actors in climate governance leaves little space for non-state actors, such as local communities, indigenous people, and Afro-descendant groups, to shape the conversation. Moreover, the IPCC struggles to engage with climate-society relationships that do not fit into Western scientific models, especially those that challenge the traditional divide between humans and nature. As a result, the reports it produces tend to overlook crucial questions of justice and equity, questions that are essential for understanding why climate change disproportionately affects Black communities and other historically marginalized groups. So, how can we create effective climate policies if we fail to include diverse perspectives and alternative ways of living in the conversation? Disasters are not random, even though climate science often presents them as unpredictable. The devastating effects of climate change are deeply rooted in historical inequalities that have shaped institutional and social structures. These structures ensure that certain populations, especially Black and indigenous communities, face greater obstacles in preparing for, surviving, and recovering from climate disasters. For example, consider the urban quilombola communities in Porto Alegre, Brazil, in the south, which were severely impacted by floods in May 2024, just last year. It's just completed 1 year of this disaster. Just to let you know, as I said, last year, unprecedented floods devastated the southern Brazilian city of Porto Alegre and surrounding regions, marking one of the country's most severe climate-related disasters. While the catastrophe affected broad sectors of the population, it was disproportionately impacted Quilombola communities, Afro-Brazilian groups, as Ton said, descendant from enslaved people, who often reside in environmentally vulnerable areas and face historical neglect in infrastructure, health, and disaster preparedness. These floods exposed deep environmental and racial injustice. Many Quilombola families lost their homes, crops, and means of subsistence, with limited access to emergency aid or state support. I was there last year during the floods. So I was there for just a committee, and everything happened really fast. So yeah, it was really hard to see how those Black communities were just facing all the disaster completely alone. The disaster highlighted not only the urgency of climate adaptation policies, but also the need to address systemic inequalities that place marginalized communities at greater risk. Recognizing the knowledge, resilience, and rights of Quilombola communities is essential in any comprehensive response to climate crisis in Brazil. Their inclusion in climate governance, land security, and recovery planning is a matter of justice and sustainability. Their experience is just one of many that reveal how environmental crises interact with racial and social inequalities. If we look at the history of Porto Alegre, we can see that Black communities were pushed into the most vulnerable areas of the city as a part of a process of gentrification and the exclusion of the Black population. But beyond these dramatic events, we must also pay attention to the everyday ways in which people experience climate change. While extreme weather events make headlines, the slow, less visible effects of climate change, like unpredictable rainfall, declining fish stocks, or soil degradation, can be just as devastating for those whose lives depend on the land and environment. But as you can see, let's now travel to Playa de Oro, northern Ecuador. The ethnographic examples that I will discuss come from my research in the Afro-descendant community of Playa de Oro, located in the Esmeraldas province of northern Ecuador. This community sits along the banks of the Santiago River near the Cotacachi-Cayapas Ecological Reserve. I have to mention that the Esmeraldas region has the highest concentration of Afro-descendants in Ecuador, and according to census data in 2001, 40% of the local population identified as Black, and in 2010, that number had increased almost to 44%. So I'm trying to navigating between Porto Alegre in the floods and now in Ecuador, also in talking about Black communities, trying to understand this experience in Latin America. I have to tell you that this region is part of Amazon region. So right now, my main focus is working in Maranhão, Belém do Pará, who will host the COP30, as Tons mentioned, and also in Ecuador and part of Peru. But let's talk about Playa de Oro. The Santiago River is essential to the people of Playa de Oro. But when I mention the river, I'm not just referring to its physical characteristics, its water, currents, or role in transportation. Instead, I want to highlight the many ways in which the river exists in people's lives, blending the natural, spiritual, and social worlds. Anthropologist Arturo Escobar, who is Colombian, uses the term grammar of place to describe how different communities in this region, especially Colombia and Ecuador, have their own ways of understanding and relating to nature. Instead of seeing the environment as just a physical space, these communities experience it as a living world full of meaning. In my work and during my research, I try to capture these local ways of being, not just by studying language or beliefs, but by understanding how people inhabit and interact with their surroundings in their daily lives. Before going further, I want to clarify the perspective I bring to this research. One of the biggest challenges in anthropology and also in humanities has been overcoming the idea that nature and culture are separated domains, that humans stand apart from the natural world, observing and controlling it. This dualism is deeply rooted in Western thought, but it doesn't apply to the Pleiadian worldview, and I have to extend this. We cannot apply this to Afro and indigenous peoples in South America in a broader way. For them, humans, animals, plants, rivers, and spirits are all part of the same world. They don't separate existence into different categories. Rather, everything's connected. When we apply rigid divisions like nature versus society, we impose an external logic that doesn't reflect how they live and experience the world. French anthropologist Philippe Descola challenges this Western view, arguing that not all societies share the same understanding of nature and humanity. Instead of assuming a universal way of relating to the environment, we should recognize the multiple ways people experience and interact with the world around them. In Playa de Oro, as for communities, urban communities in Porto Alegre as well, nature isn't something separate from human life. It's intertwined with social relationships, history, and identity. When we think about traditional communities and climate change, the conversation is often about adaptation, how these groups adjust to environmental challenges. But this approach is too limited. Instead of seeing communities like Playa de Oro or maybe urban communities in Porto Alegre as simply responding to change, we need to recognize their active role in shaping their environment. Another anthropologist, Tim Ingold, argues that humans and their surroundings are constantly shaping each other in a process of mutual transformation. This is exactly what we see in Afro-Latin American communities, not just in Playa de Oro. The community doesn't just adapt to nature, they coexist with it in a deep and ongoing relationship. Their knowledge and practice have been formed through generations of living in this place, create a unique way of engaging with the land, the river, and the non-human beings that share their world. So, I want to take you to Playa de Oro, this is a small Afro-descendant community in northern Ecuador, Amazon region, where I spent time doing my field work. As I said, this community sits on the banks of the Santiago River, a river that is much more than just water. It shapes daily life, relationship, and even fears. I think I will, okay, it's later. When I was in Playa de Oro in 2018, it rained almost every day between March and April. The storms arrived suddenly with lightning and thunder announcing their presence. The entire community would stop what they were doing. Children playing outside, women drying clothes, people working with cacao and rush indoors. But not everything paused. If the rain was light, the men's soccer games continued. The rain became part of the rhythm of life. The people of Playa de Oro possess deep knowledge of their environment. They can predict rain by just observing the birds or sensing the heat before a storm. Knowing how to listen to the birds helps them to plan their day because there's specific birds that can communicate, hey, a storm is coming. So this can help them plan their day, whether for doing laundry or working on the cocoa plantation. But in recent years, the rain and also the birds' communication has brought something far more dangerous, the rising waters of the Santiago River. For those who live by the river, heavy rains means sleepless nights. They worry that the Santiago might flood, bring water, mud, and debris from upstream. In the morning, people gather at the riverbank to check its level, to share information, and to discuss what happened during the night. The color of the water also tells a story. Normally, the Santiago is a deep green, as you can see in the picture, blending with the landscape. But after a storm, it turns brown and murky, a sign that heavy rains have fallen elsewhere. Even though Playa de Oro is the last community along the river, people there can predict what is happening in other places by just observing the water, like the color, as I said, but also the movement of the river. Over time, their knowledge of the river has been confirmed by local news reports, proving their deep connection with this environment. The Playa-Doreños have learned to read the landscape and can foresee what is to come. One of the most significant events in recent memory was the flood of 2010. That year, the Santiago rose so much that it destroyed parts of houses along the Malecon, the main riverfront avenue. Even years later, this flood was still a major topic of conversation in the community. One of my closest interlocutors, Dona Edita, 100-year-old midwife, often spoke about how she lost everything in that flood. Her house, food, furniture, and even her religious figures. She told me, I was terrified, you hear? Even though they all understood that something was about to happen, especially through the technique of observing the water, the waters and other elements, it was difficult to understand how angry the Santiago was. Another interlocutor, Rocio, described how the flood waters rose until they reached the church, nearly a meter high. People watched in silence as the river invaded their homes. They could do nothing but wait for the water to retreat. When they returned, everything was destroyed. As they say in Playa de Oro, el río tiene su fuerza. The river has its own strength. The Santiago, it's not just a source of water, food, or gold. The name Playa de Oro can tell us the history about mining and actually right now illegal mining in this region. The river is also organizes space, shapes identity, and connects people to the past and future. The way the Playa-Doreños talk about the Santiago shows they can see it as a being with its own agency, not just a natural resource. The river can become very angry. It is a common say in Playa de Oro. Dona Edita tells that when she senses a woman may have complications during childbirth, she takes the woman to the Santiago River days before and asks her to sit in its waters. It is the river that convinces the child that they are part of the outside world, the world of Praia de Ouro. This makes the birth go smoothly, says Dona Edita. Anthropologist Eduardo Kohn, who studied in Ecuador and also in other regions of Amazonia, suggests that forests are not just something to be thought about. They think in their own way. Following this idea, the Santiago is not just a river that people describe. It acts, it influences, and changes things. It creates new ways of thinking and being. Anthropology has long tried to separate nature from culture, human from non-human, not just anthropology, the whole science, the whole canon. But in Praia de Ouro, these distinctions don't hold. The river is not just an object of study, it is part of life, shaping how people move, relate, and understand the world. Tim Ingold, again, argues that knowledge of environment is not something we learn from books. It is something we experience by living in a place. For the people of Praia de Ouro, knowing the river is not just about observation, it is about being part of it. To be born and raised by the Santiago means developing an intimate sensory relationship with its flows, rhythms, and moods. This knowledge is not abstract, it is lived. So I want to talk more about the relationships that shape the world of the Santiago, that shape the world of the Rio Santiago and its surrounds. To do this, I will start with the words of Dom Davi, one of the elders of Praia de Ouro. He explains that everything in nature is connected. The fish in the river, the animals in the forest, and even the smallest insects, some of which can only be seen under a microscope. When one element is harmed, the entire system is affected. So I will translate because I put in Spanish, but I would read in English what Dom Davi is talking about. Look, in this case, conserving water and land involves living beings. Fish are living beings. Animals are living beings. So what happens? If someone puts, let's say, poison in the water where the fish are, they wipe out an entire generation because both the big ones and the small ones die. The same goes for animals. And it's not just animals. There are many kinds of insects in the primary forest, and sometimes these insects are beneficial to humans. Some are so small that they can only be seen under a microscope, but they are very important for people. This way of seeing the world, it's not just about managing natural resources. It reflects a deep understanding of the environment based on perception and experience. Dom Davi and people of Praia de Ouro recognize that they are part of a larger network that includes all living beings, even those that are invisible to the human eye. Their perspective is not only about conservation for human benefit, it is about maintaining a world where many different beings coexist. As I said, for the people of Praia de Ouro, the Rio Santiago is not just a body of water, it is an active presence in their lives. As the Brazilian anthropologist Eduardo Viveiro de Castro suggests, the river is an entity because it exists within multiple interconnected worlds. It is not just a resource, it is a force that reacts, remembers, and influences human life. If the river acts with all its strength, the river acts. And the river's action does not allude to a worldview, but to the realization of a world. Anne-Marie Lozonsky, a Hungarian anthropologist who conducted research in the same region between 1970 to 90, already stated that for these groups, the river falls within the category of the living. This brings us to a key question. Why has Playa de Oro experienced so many floods in recent years? Or in the words of Playa de Oreños, why has the Santiago River been acting with such fear in recent years? From the community's perspective, these floods are not random natural disasters. They are the river's response to human actions, especially illegal mining, deforestation, and pollution. Mercury from gold extraction contaminates the water, and the destruction of the forest destabilizes the land. These activities carried out by external agents have changed the environment in ways that threaten the community's way of life. Don Davi warns that the river is home to many beings, spirits, people, then at the bottom of the water that are the same spirits that we have on land. Every living being lives on a planet, and there are many beings in the river, says Don Davi. Therefore, the anger of the Santiago is the result of the disharmony caused by all the threats that Playa de Oro has been facing, and this enrages the waters. Local authorities have proposed relocating Playa de Oro to a safer area, farther from the river. But for the Playa de Oreños, this solution ignores the real problem. They ask, why should we leave while the true causes of these disasters, which is deforestation, mining, pollution, continue? As Don Davi warns, if these destructive activities do not stop, disasters will continue. Despite these challenges, Playa de Oro has survived for over 400 years. The community has resisted many threats throughout history and has managed to maintain its lands and traditions. This resilience gives me hope. It is true that Afro-Ecuadorian communities like Playa de Oro are among the most vulnerable to environmental disaster and social injustice. But they also hold valuable knowledge that can help us find solutions. As the Brazilian environmentalist and philosopher Ailton Krenak reminds us, recognizing and respecting these interconnected worlds can help us delay the end of our own world. So this is part of my reflections, but I just want to add one point. I'd like to add a reflection on the upcoming COP30 and express my hope that it will be a turning point. One where the voices of indigenous and Afro-descendant communities are finally heard and taken seriously in global climate negotiations. So the upcoming COP30 in Brazil is scheduled to take place in Belém this semester in November, represents a historic opportunity to reposition traditional Amazonian communities, including indigenous people, quilombolas, Riverinha populations, and extractivists, as key actors in confronting the climate crisis. These communities have not only inhabited the forest for centuries, but have actively preserved it, developing sustainable ways of life and ancestral knowledge that are essential for biodiversity conservation and global climate balance. In this context, it is urgent to ensure their effective participation in the debates and decision-making process of COP30. This includes guaranteeing mechanisms for free, prior, and informed consent, investing in public policies that strengthen their autonomy, and recognizing their territories as real barriers against deforestation and climate change. COP30 must be more than a diplomatic event. It must become a milestone in the recognition of traditional ways of life as central allies in building climate just and socially inclusive futures. So I want to believe that the Amazon cannot be merely the backdrop of the conference. It must be a political subject of the process. So thank you all for listening me. I'm really happy and grateful for have this space to share some ideas with you all. I'm sorry if I was struggling with some words and pronunciations. It's been really hard come back to English worlds. I'm doing my best tonight. So thank you so much. I had some photos as well, and I just forgot to share with you all.
Thank you so much, Janaina, for this incredibly researched, really rich, thoughtful, and such an important talk. I am fascinated by everything you've had to say, and as my own background is in performance studies, which is a field that's at the intersection of theater and anthropology. So I'm really very interested in what you say about these embodied practices that bring sort of bridge the Western division between the human and the non-human and restore that relationship. So thank you so much for everything you had to say about that. And for sharing your thoughts about COP30 as well. We want to open up the floor to questions. I'm going to open up a gallery view so that we can see each other. I know a few folks had to leave, but we had one question that was asked in advance. So maybe I'll start with that question and we'll see if other folks have questions they want to ask. The question that was asked in advance was about economic policy in relationship to indigenous farmers and Afro-descendant farmers in Brazil who, for economic reasons, have had to participate in the deforestation of the Amazon, Brazil, Ecuador, other countries. Because of the incentives to work with monocrops, soy, for example, or to participate or to open up land for mining. And this person would like to know if you have any hope about alternative economic plans that would allow indigenous farmers instead to invest in saving the forest.
Thank you, Tom, so much. I was thinking about your question, especially for one reason. It's even more concerning is that are now proposals to expand oil exploration in the Amazon, threatening both the forests and the communities who have protected for generations. So we're facing like a war here. I'm not sure if you all are aware about this, but Marina Silva, which is our minister, she was severely under threats because she was trying to negotiate this exploration in Amazon region, and she just lost. She lost the battle. So I was thinking about this and how this question right now in Brazil is an urgent question. And I just wrote some something, because I was wondering, like, okay, I will be nervous, especially about the language, so I have to write some a kind of a guidance, some lines to develop my ideas. For example, as I said, it's an essential question. And to enable indigenous and Afro-descendant communities to resist, for example, soy, which is the biggest threat, not just exploration of oil or whatever, but to resist soy or GMO monocultures, we need public and private investment that value traditional economies and territorial autonomy. And we don't have this right now in Brazil. Nothing. This includes funding for agroecological practices, community-led land management, and infrastructure that support local markets rather than global agribusiness. As I said, especially in Amazon region, it's all we don't have right now. We are not in, I mean, we are better than 4 years ago during Bolsonaro's government. We are better now, but still our Congress, it's so, there is a lot of politicians that we talk about the agribusiness chair. So we have a lot of people from agribusiness in our Congress. So even we have a government that it's aligned with some ecological agenda, and even if we have a really important figure like Marina Silva in the ministry, even though the Congress is approving a lot of laws that, like, it's opening the Amazon region for exploration. And I was thinking about this now. So we have a Congress that it's not helping us with policies, and right now all the communities are under this threat. So I was thinking, it's not just investments, how can I say? I was thinking about investments that could be long-term and co-designed with communities, respecting their knowledge systems. But I'm pretty sure that Amazon region must be a global interest. So it's not, it cannot be just a Brazilian concern. Right now, if we have to fight for Amazon, I mean, the entire world can be with us, trying to force and trying to avoid these threats and these things that are happening now. But I want to add a payment for ecosystem service and climate financing mechanism, if implemented with real safeguards, can also offer financial alternatives that align with forest conservation and cultural resilience. But again, this is a challenge. We are still trying to navigating under political decisions, especially with a Congress, with this Brazilian Congress, and also we are trying to understand what we can do to just mitigate all those decisions and not put those communities under a big threat. But however, as long as we remain tied to an to a capitalism, I want to say extrativismo, capitalismo extrativista, a extractive capitalism development model, these alternative ways of living will continue to be marginalized or rendered impossible. The current political and economic frameworks are not designed to support plurality, autonomy, or ecological care. And that's where our struggle lies, our insistence, our commitment. And I can assure this battle, it's not in vain, but I think now it's a time that you have to reunite actions and forces and paying attention in Amazon region, not because the vital role in regulating the Earth's climate. It's not because Amazon can cooling the Earth, but also because it's a place of a lot of communities, and yeah, it's something that I'm thinking about, and that we are trying to develop some strategies with this community to bring during the COP30, and how people, different agents can hear that voice. Finally, it's a hope, but also it's a battle. But it's not in vain. Sometimes I'm so full of hope, and sometimes I'm so hopeless, and a kind of a despair. But if we look into the history and we see how those communities are alive under all the colonial structures, under all the violence they are historically suffering, and they're alive and they are teaching us a lot of knowledge. So I always thinking they will not eliminate those people. Those people will resist and will fight back.
Thank you, Janaina. There's so much more I want to say and ask, but first let me open up the room to any other questions. Please feel free to raise your hand or just jump in. Lisa, look, are you unmuted? Would you like to, and then we'll bring in Claudia.
Thank you. Speaking of hope, I was wondering if you might speak briefly to, is it hopeful that in Ecuador there's actually provisions that recognize the rights of nature and some protection for rivers and forests? I've heard from some of the people who were part of that. I know it's not perfect, but is there hope in that recognition that of the not beyond just the human world?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I'll just write your question. So you were talking about recognition and how this can help those communities. That's it?
How that this conversation has been happening in Ecuador, where the Constitution had enabling language that took many years to turn into decisions that protected forests from mining, for instance. Is this something that you see might have impact on the Amazon and in Brazil, perhaps?
I have to talk about the constitutional recognition in Brazil and Ecuador. In Brazil, we have the Constitution from 1988, and in Ecuador, it's 1995, something like that. After those laws, all the communities gain some visibility into international and national arena. But there's something that always, it's a concern, and I'm always afraid about that. Sometimes laws, they are really important, but they don't guarantee all the rights. What I'm saying, even though like here in Brazil, all the communities have the right to possess their lands, they still don't have all the documents. So like Brazilian government are working on providing these documents, but everything is too slow. So, for example, a community that are living in a specific area for like 300 centuries, but they don't have the document of the land. So we have the law, we have the right, but the process to obtain the real document that could affirm that they are the I forgot, os proprietários, I forgot, Yumi.
That they would own the land, that they would be the proprietor of the land.
Yeah, sure. So Brazilian government is still working on this. So if they don't have the document, anyone can do whatever they want in that lands. So we have the laws, for example, we have a law about mining, but those laws are not enough to avoid and to protect communities in Amazon region. So we are talking about two worlds. We have the law and we don't have the application of this law that could guarantee all the rights and all the protection that those people need to avoid all these threats. So I worked in Brazilian government for 5 years. And I worked on trying to reach some justice to those communities. And I working specifically with quilombolas in the South region and trying to organize the papers, organize the narratives, because they don't have any register about the lands. They have just an oral memory. So my work as anthropologist was just trying to bring up those memories of the ancestrals and translate this to the justice system, which is so like, which loves material proofs. And I was trying to bring up those memories just to bring and understand that they are the real owners of these lands. But even though the Brazilian government are working with anthropologists and working with oral memories and all those things, we are struggling in put those memories into a material proof that could convince the justice that they are the real owners. So we have the law, we have the recognition, and we are talking about constitutional recognition in Ecuador and in Brazil, but this is not working. This is not enough. We have all this system, the legal system, and the legal system is not enough to avoid all the threats and I mean, a tentativa de eliminação desses grupos. We are not
Trying to eliminate these groups.
Yes, we are not doing a good job.
To avoid trying
it.
to eliminate these groups.
That's why, Lisa, what we are doing right now, we are trying to bring more people into the conversation. We are trying to build more bridges and bring more allies into this conversation. So, for example, in Ecuador, in Playa de Oro, they don't have electric, they don't have internet, so they're using other agents and allies to bring all these problems to the world. So that's why these conversations are so important, because we are talking about the threats that those communities are facing. They're always facing historically a lot of threats. But now we're talking about the destruction of an entire world. And I know that this could affect disproportionately communities. And I know that climate change the effects of climate change are really racist. But at the same time, it's important to bring up those conversations into a broader audience. I mean, for different agents, and it's what we are trying to do now, bring more people and allies into the conversation, and trying to establish some strategies for the COP30, thinking that the world will be keeping an eye on this event. So it's our opportunity to turn this discussion.
Sounds like we need Augusto Boal back to do Theater of the Oppressed all through around COP30 to spread word using performance. Before I bring Claudia, I think you're next. I'll just note that I'm going to pop in the chat a link to the Urban Pastorals project, and then I'll follow that with a link to the Growing Center events and a link to the Racial Justice Collaborative. But please, I'll turn it over to Claudia.
Thank you. And thank you, Janaina, for a really interesting presentation, beautifully done. My question is, do you think it's possible that indigenous communities in various parts of the world can create connections and communicate with each other about the challenges they face, and about ways that they might educate each other, and even create some solidarity and a united front of resistance? I know that there would be incredible challenges to that because, as you pointed out, there's no internet, there's no electricity. But are there ways that indigenous communities can reach out to each other and create a network around the world?
Well, Claudia, thank you so much. Absolutely. I just mentioned that Ecuador, especially Playa de Oro, they don't have electricity or internet, but absolutely, traditional communities around the world share common struggles: dispossession, environmental degradation, cultural erasure, but also share powerful forms of resistance rooted in ancestral knowledge, care for the land, the community-based living. So these shared experience create fertile ground for building transnational networks of solidarity. Can you imagine, like Playa de Oro, they don't have electricity, but now I'm talking about them. And so we are already seeing examples of this. I'm just an anthropologist, but right now, if in a point that they don't have the opportunity to talk in person about their own struggles, I'm trying to be a translator. So, as I said, we're already seeing examples of this through academic collaborations, social movements, and digital technologies. Indigenous and also Afro-descendant communities, they are exchanging strategies, supporting each other's cause, and building alliances and transcending borders. In Brazil, we have a strong social Black movement that are trying to do these connections, and agents from Black social movements that are trying to build this kind of networks. And actually, these networks allow them not only to resist global systems of oppressions, but to collective imagine and defending alternative ways of living. So even though it's hard, I think this kind of solidarity is not just possible, it's necessary. And I believe that it's already in motion. there's a lot of initiatives through Latin America trying to reunite the leaderships from different communities and trying to think ways of how they can resist. I just remember like 8 years ago, I'm talking about 8 years ago, in São Luís, Maranhão, where I born, we had a big event just for Black communities. And I remember that I said, hey, guys, you have to bring people from Playa de Oro. And we struggled to issue the ID because they didn't have an ID. We were struggling to issue a passport, but we won and they came to Brazil and was wonderful. It was just two leadership from Playa de Oro, but it was amazing because they were talking about their lives. So they're on in their own way. So yes, I strongly believe in these networks, even though it's not easy, but it's something that we have to pursue. And this solidarity is in motion. It's happening in some way.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question? We'll definitely give Janaina a little time to drink and catch your breath after providing such wonderful information. We're almost out of time, but I'll say that I'm really inspired by your message, and you're really making rethink the Anthropocene. Your criticism of that term is really registers that because of the asymmetrical difference between those who've contributed the most to climate change and those who are impacted the most by it. So the Anthropocene is not distributed symmetrically by any means. And I also really appreciate your point that rather than asking the global north to be allies with the Amazon because we need it to cool the planet and are afraid of the tipping point of deforestation, instead asking us to be allies with the communities who are stewarding that land and whose knowledge is important to us. It's always seemed to me, along with climate ethicists, that the question really is, who do we need to become as human beings in order to be worthy of this planet with which we are in such deep relationships. So I really appreciate your talk, and thank you very much for it. I'll ask just one more time if anyone else has another question. If not, I think let's all join me in thanking Janaina Lobo for such a wonderful talk tonight. Thank you
Thank you
so much.
much.
And thank you to Yumi for the introduction, and to Lisa. I'm sorry, Janaina, go ahead.
No, I'm saying that I'm really happy and I'm so grateful for you all. Thank you for Somerville Community Growing Center. Thank you, Yumi and Lisa, Ton, and everybody that was with me tonight. So it was just amazing. Thank you so much, Ton.
And
I
I'm also
would love to meet you all in person.
we will make that happen once our political situation changes here and everyone can
I'm
feel
pretty sure
welcome and comfortable back in
Yes.
here in the United States. And I also really appreciated just really thinking as richly as you're thinking about the work that anthropologists can do in uplifting this knowledge and making sure that it is heard. So thank you so much for your important work. I will make sure to share this recording. I'm hoping, because this has been such an important talk, I'm also hoping to circulate this recording more widely. So I will try to, if it's okay with you, Janaina, we can all share this recording with our networks as well. But for now, have a great night. Janaina, thank you very much. And
Thank you.
we hope to see you at other Growing Center events in the near future. Have a good night, everyone.